Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Gary Bardini. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Department of Water Resources. I thought it'd be kind of maybe to capture really this year in water. I think we talked about the drought, but there was a number of things that happened in the administration. One is really progressing the California Water Action Plan. And within the California Water Action Plan with the administration, it highlighted a number of areas related to water reliability, restoration and water quality improvements in the system, delta management, but more importantly, it also reinforces the need and the improvements in flood management, along with the aspects of financing. With that, we've had the passage of both Proposition 1, which is driven a lot by the structuring of the financing needed under the Water Action Plan, and then, of course, we had groundwater legislation. Why I think all these are important is because they really were significant, I think, changes in where we're moving in water management, ultimately trying to move towards sustainable water management in the state. And of course, sustainable means dealing with too little and then in the case too much. And I think the videos reflect that quite well. Within that, the Department of Water Resources typically organizes itself around the management of that in three major areas. One is a continuation of strengthen regional governance and management and the aspects of local assistance and financial assistance. We also provide significant technical and planning support to the efforts outlined. And then lastly, we deal with a lot of the interregional management of infrastructure improvements and management of systems, not only the State Water Project, but also the State Plan of Flood Control, which we're talking about today. With that, and within the flood, has been essentially what is a major driver in the management has been essentially two reports. One was the Flood Futures Report that Ellen used some of the information on, which provides a statewide perspective of the flood management challenges. And then, of course, more importantly, within the State Plan of Flood Control facilities, has been the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in 2012. Within that, it really recognizes the challenges of both the capital or the loss of life potential, and more importantly, the aspects of the actual consequences economically that occur. Within that, in the Central Valley Flood Plan, which has been essentially a predominant focus of the current financing, both on Proposition 1E and 84, is that essentially we recognize that essentially in the challenges within that system, both of essentially maintaining the urban economies, protecting agricultural, and of course maintaining the ecosystems in which the system lies, we laid out a plan of essentially estimating at $14 to $17 billion of investment needed moving forward. Of which time we've moved under the Flood Safe Initiative a number of initiatives to help towards improving that system. And if you look at the course of the period since 2006, the state of California, working through many of the folks around this table, have invested themselves over $3 billion in that, and we're looking at putting 3/4 or so of the current bond financing and culminating with the remaining $1 billion or so plus that we look to do over the next 5 years. Within that, we partner closely with local agencies and federal agencies, and Rick will give more about the Corps' role, which is most of this is still within the federal flood control system. With that, what I did provide, just to give at least an indication of what we've done, there is a map that shows a lot of the investment over this period that just kind of reflects the activity, which I did provide. We can hand this to the crowd. Sure. Copy. And within that, this map here really reflects essentially an investment, essentially under three principal areas of programs. One within the State Plan of Flood Control facilities, which is heavily in the Central Valley and are kind of depicted in the orange area. There are those parts that are still in the Delta that are outside of the State Plan of Flood Control, which is kind of reflected. And then we still continue to provide support statewide in projects, and the map kind of reflects essentially a lot of the activities that we've supported. Principally in the implementation of this, the department basically continues to promote programs towards emergency management, in which Tina kind of reflected. We also do O&M, and this particularly in the Sacramento Valley, both the channels and levee maintenance. To go further, we have an extensive floodplain management program we work with FEMA on and continue to try to address the floodplain management issues, and Melinda kind of reflected a little bit of challenges there. And then lastly, it's been the aspects of continuation of the project improvements. Typically, the project improvements in the Central Valley have been focused on three principal areas: continuation of the rural management, the urban areas, and providing larger system improvements like the bypass, or et cetera. Last thing I just kind of recognize is that we are in a period of extensive implementation with the bond funds, but we're also looking towards the planning of a post-bond period, and with the adoption of the 2017 Central Valley Flood Plan. And within that, I see that we will basically focus much more, not only the improvement side of where to go beyond the initial estimates, but we'd also be looking for how do we improve our operation and maintenance, and how would that look moving forward, along with dealing with residual flood risk and emergency management that's going to be required moving forward. And then lastly, I think the thorniest issue, which I know we kind of described, the aspects of stable financing and financing for flood management, and particularly the multi-benefit side in connection, will be a challenge moving forward. And we hope to shape that conversation in the 2017 plan.
Great. Thank you very much. And Mr. Poppelman, thank you so much for your patience, and been very much eagerly anticipating your presentation.
Thank you. And good morning to everybody, and we appreciate, the Corps appreciates being invited to come over and share. A lot of things you're going to hear some repetition because I think one of my, well, first of all, I'm Rick Poppelman. I'm Chief of Engineering Division here in the Sacramento District Corps of Engineers, and I'm the Levee Safety Officer for the district and the Dam Safety Officer. And then kind of going a little bit beyond that, I know we're focusing mostly on the Central Valley, but I just wanted to say we have a district office in San Francisco that kind of deals with that, with the coastal area, and then in Southern California we have a Los Angeles district office that deals with the things down there. So just to kind of give you a perspective, we have a large presence in California. The Sacramento district is one of our larger districts in the entire Corps, and part of that's because of the flood situation and all the projects that we have out here. But probably the thing that I wanted to emphasize the most is the partnership, and you've heard that, the multi-layers of government. And it is a true, we are integral. We talk every day with Leslie's group. I mean, it's a constant. With the Department of Water Resources, we are in regular meetings, whether it's for our planning studies that dovetail with what the state's doing, and some of the ongoing design and construction work. There is constant coordination and communication. That has its own challenges. It doesn't mean it's perfect, but there is a significant effort of partnering going on. In the Corps, in our Civil Works mission, we plan, we design, we construct. In some cases, we operate, but mostly we oversee. We help oversee O&M from a federal perspective on projects where we've participated, and there's also an element of emergency response when we're called in to help in large disasters. And a lot of times that's the state takes that action, and usually FEMA is also part of that. But the kind of, I guess, a couple of examples. There's a joint operations center located here in Sacramento for the valley that helps orchestrate the operation of the reservoirs and monitoring levees. All that stuff integrates together. The DWR that's actually in their facility, the Bureau of Reclamation, who owns a number of dams with flood control space, and the Corps of Engineers, when the time is right, we sit down and look at how we're operating during a flood event. So that kind of an example. A couple of the things, and so you've already heard some of this, but there's statistics out there. There's 6,500 miles of levees in the Central Valley, and about 1,600 of that are part of what we call the federal system, kind of the main stem of the Sacramento, San Joaquin, and some of the significant tributaries are the primary focus of that. So that's, and then in addition to that, the dams. There's about, kind of the significant dams. There's about 34 plus or minus dams that have flood control space that the federal government, about half of those we operate directly, and the other half it's either state reclamation, Bureau of Reclamation, or local flood control or irrigation districts. So all that kind of gets coordinated and ties into the levee systems. I think it's been stated already, but I want to emphasize that we don't own really any of the levees. We provide we provide the federal oversight, and we work closely with the local maintaining agencies, flood control districts, reclamation districts, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and DWR to make that work. And so that's kind of the general piece of that. A couple of things that I wanted to add, kind of getting into that our planning, design, construction. So one of the things that we bring a fair amount of technical capability to the table, but I think one of the big things is that we try to bring a chunk of financing and funding to the table, and you all know that's been a bit of a struggle for the federal government to figure that out. But planning studies, for instance, that we participate in, it's a 50-50 cost share usually, where the Fed's paying 50 and the local entities are paying 50 of that. And then when we get into that next phase where we're designing and constructing, it's typically about a 65% federal and a 35% state and local government cost share. So that's usually that's a good thing. That's a big part of what we do and how we help. Let's see. I will say some of the things. So getting more into probably the levee system in the Central Valley, some of the things that we're doing, and kind of how we operate. So the Corps, and it kind of ties back to Katrina, we've been, since then, kind of heightened our awareness and funding that goes into in how we look at levees, how much effort we're putting into it. So we've been on this essentially 5-year cycle to do very detailed periodic inspections of the levee systems across the country, not just here, and to really get a good idea of what their conditions are. And we've also been looking at it from a risk standpoint, kind of taking those inspections and applying the engineering to that. What are the risks? Where are the high risk? Risk is really kind of that probability of failure plus the consequences, what's behind the levees, and that kind of equates to risk. So from a national standpoint, being able to prioritize across the country where we should be pointing our limited federal dollars. And it's clear that Sacramento is a very high risk area, the valley essentially, not just the city of Sacramento, but so lots of significant urban areas behind levees that we know they weren't originally engineered and constructed very well, or they just haven't been funded for the proper O&M over the years. So in that light, just kind of real roughly, some of the things, and they've been touched on, you saw it in the videos, some of the significant issues that we have, encroachments, whether it's buildings, abandoned pipes that go through that have that have no closures, lots of rodent activities, holes. So those are the kind of things that we see that inhibit the performance of the levee directly or inhibit operation and maintenance. So and frankly, there was a little bit of pain getting that going. I think the response from the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and the LMAs has been fantastic, realizing, hey, yeah, we need to figure out how to do this, and we're seeing significant improvements in the last few years as a result of our inspections and our coordination with DWR. Kind of maybe the last point that I wanted to bring up, and it ties into the kind of overall flood protection. It's part of our planning process. The state, DWR, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, I know have similar views, but it's really about risk. How do we invest our limited dollars? Where's the right place to make that investment first? So that's what we want to do. We want to look at those high risk areas and make sure we're doing that first, and then kind of work our way down through from a risk perspective. And you're probably aware of some of the examples. The Folsom Flood Control Project, the new dam and spillway that's moving along pretty far into it. We just got authorized and appropriated for the Natomas levee system to start designs and construction to try to finish that work that the state and SAFCA partnered on. They did probably about half of that work, so we're poised to finish that off. The Sutter Basin, the project has been authorized, and that is being done again by the locals and state. A big chunk of that with the bond money, because the federal government is not ready, doesn't have the money to fund everything. So that's being done, and we provide some oversight to that. And then the kind of the big planning studies that are kind of on the cusp that we're getting close to the end on. Again, working closely with the state, the American River, Sacramento River levees, the West Sacramento project, and the Stockton area levee projects. So again, I want to thank the state for inviting us over, and I think we have a complicated but very productive and strong partnership.
Great. Thank you very much. You guys make talking about flood control like watching water fill up in a bathtub. But to kick off the Q&A, I want to get to something that a lot of people are thinking about after Friday. The governor's proposed budget has $1.1 billion of Prop 1E money in it. Where should it be spent? How do we direct those resources?
Okay, I'm going to try and answer Assemblyman Dodd's question earlier, first of all, because he asked if there's a list. And there are actually several lists, and I had mentioned that JPAs, these regional agencies, have formed. Sacramento's is called Sacramento Area Flood Control Association, Sutter Butte Flood Control Association, or agency rather. The Stockton area, the San Joaquin has one, and we have Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority. So they've all done these, and so they have these large, very civil works projects. So they're so large that they have individual projects like the Natomas that was mentioned. And so they, within those agencies, have a list of projects, if you will, that they have already initiated. Some are even completed. I think Sutter Butte is on phase 3 now or something like that of theirs. So there's that. In addition, the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan that was mentioned, that was approved in 2012, it's in implementation now, and what they did is they split that orange area, the 1.7 million acres that is protected by the state plan flood control system, into 6 regions, and those regions came up with regional flood management plans. And I know, like, one of the regions had 120 projects on their list. So there is lists, if you will, that do exist as a result of those activities. The $1.1 billion, yeah, it's a lot of money to spend all in one year, so I would like to hear from the department, is it a phased spending, and how that's going to work, but those large civil works projects, obviously, they're ongoing, and we'll need that continued funding to get them up, and the cities and counties really still need to get up that 200-year level of protection. They were given a legislative deadline to be able to show adequate progress by 2016. That's important, and then not to be forgotten, we can't really forget the rural levees, because to make the system work, you have to make those urban, as you make them better, you potentially then have to make the rural ones a little bit better.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Does anyone else have a response on that?
Yeah, Gary Burney. There's big lists, and every project got a given aspect of readiness. I think one of the limiting factors for moving them is not only getting through the aspects of the design and the permitting of them, but there's always the aspects of essentially a cost share between both federal, state, and local agencies. So the availability of the federal budget to support many of the projects that Melinda talked about is a factor. The ability to raise capital in the 218 is an issue at a local agency. So we're always in a kind of a balance between all 3 agencies or 3 levels of government with their budgets towards that large list. And then we go through, I think what Rick had reflected, as a bit of a prioritization of the efforts. So I'd say generally in the Central Valley Flood Plan, it reflects a prioritization of moving not only to essentially urban improvements, but for system improvements like the bypass. And I think we're making progress on that in alignment among agencies. And those take longer to bring to readiness, but I think the aspects of broader benefit and value are significant. And then we have to maintain a rural system, and we continue to progress that with a lot of the maintaining agencies. So I think we have essentially a long list of projects. I think we're kind of basically more in a prioritization against that list.
All right, any questions from members at this point in time? All right, Mr. Gallagher, did you want to ask a question?
I just, on that same note, and this might have been mentioned, I apologize, had to leave a little bit earlier.
That's never happened before.
You came back, that's the important part.
Yeah. As far as the money that's been spent so far, and Gary, you mentioned, $3 billion that's been invested. How much of the money that has been spent, bond money, 1E money that's been spent so far, how much of that has been on construction, infrastructure, and how much has been devoted to planning?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I'm looking at my table, trying to do the math in my head. But I think if you looked at it, I bet you at least 80 to 85% is in the construction or in that category. I will say the aspects of driving the evaluation, both our flood risk management mapping program was a significant effort that we did with the Corps of Engineers. But I would say the planning part is really a small fraction.
Great, and just as a follow-up for Mr. Gallagher, if you can provide those numbers to committee staff, we will circulate it with committee members as well as Mr. Gallagher, who's joining us today. Any other questions from members at this time? One thing that we hear brought up time and time again is that the Delta is a critical piece to the flood control puzzle. Tell us a little bit more about how we're grappling with that.
Go ahead. I'll follow you.
Well, as I explained, the legislature reached the point in 2009 that said we have so many demands in support of a healthy Delta levee system, and the funds just don't measure up to the level of the demand. So we were assigned, the Delta Stewardship Council was assigned the responsibility to develop a prioritization plan. While we are developing the finer points in that, there exists today in the Delta Plan guidance that prioritizes urban protection, and then protection of assets, and then thirdly, agricultural valued property. That's an oversimplification, but that's useful. I think that's enough detail for these purposes. So over the last several years, the Department of Water Resources has funded through the subventions program matching funds to the reclamation districts that are in the Delta in support of those local projects, as well as cooperating with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and their projects on the periphery. So we have essentially a practice now in the Delta of attempting to bring up all levees to a minimum standard. And that minimum standard probably varies whether it's urban protection or agricultural protection. But currently only about 31% of the levees meet a minimum standard. So we've got a long ways to go, and the department and the limited funds that they have distributed have been directed at trying to address those areas that are out of standard and to bring them up. It's at the rate we're going, it's going to take many, many years to even meet that minimum standard.
You raised a really good one. Ms. Terry, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I will add on to that. If you think about the flood system that the state now owns and operates, it was proposed and approved in 1917 and started construction soon after that. So it came first, but it then became a convenient water conveyance system because, of course, where that water was coming from, same place where the flood water is coming from. And so those levees then became the conveyance system, and then the Delta became the hub for the pumping to be able to export that water where our growing population is located. And so it's really interesting because I have to participate with another hat that I wear in a lot of Delta stuff, and they talk about flows a lot, but it's always flows for water supply, but for flood, we have flood flows. There's just two different kinds of flows that you're managing. And I think really if you think about our state now, we have a large population where there's a health and safety issue of having drinking water available to them. And so from a political sense, they're more powerful and they can beat that drum louder because it is really important to them. And then the population that's protected by the flood system, we're much smaller and our drum often does not beat as loudly and we don't get as much of attention. And so unfortunately, and particularly since really 2009 when the Delta package was done, when you talked about levees, all anyone ever talked about was Delta levees, forgetting that the state has responsibility and liability for 1,600 miles of levees from Red Bluff down to Fresno. And so we see the funding for the rest of the system maybe wane off a little bit. And when it comes to coordination, we really could and should do a better job of coordinating, and I'll just give a couple examples that are from the Delta Stewardship Council's plan. One of the big issues, I'll call it elephant in the room, that wasn't brought up by any of the speakers, so I'll bring it up, is vegetation on levees. The Army Corps, as part of their periodic inspections and determining whether you're eligible for PL 8499, has a policy that you can't have any vegetation on the levees. And our state, for decades, they were not enforcing that, and so our levees have quite a bit. Very expensive to remove. DWR has written a great 60-page reason why we couldn't and shouldn't, both from an ecosystem and cost standpoint. But in the meantime, the Delta Stewardship Council has, their plan wants to add 20 linear miles of vegetation on levees, which are primarily project levees, part of this system. So now you have a conflict between what allows you to remain eligible for 100% funding by the federal government when there's a levee failure, because they'll pay 100% to repair it, but you're no longer eligible. So now we have a conflict with our own state policy. So those things, you can make a decision, but nobody's really coordinating to figure those kinds of things out. The same with, you could say, the BDCP. They have Conservation Measure 2 to inundate the Yellow Bypass, which is the major workhorse of that state plan of flood control system, to inundate it for fish because it's a ESA mitigation for their pumping facilities that are part of the CVP and SWP. So but that may conflict with the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, those 6 regions. So the region in the lower Sac Valley, they've got a list of projects. It may conflict with that. Now, it doesn't have to, because we really can, if we're smart to really coordinate it, we can figure out ways to bundle those together so that we're achieving the water supply benefits, the flood benefits, and the ecosystem benefits as part of that. But it really, with that kind of coordination, honestly, is at that level is just not going on. And so the big fear for a lot of the locals, because you even heard Ellen, like half of the money that goes in is from the locals. But even the state should be worried, because we've already invested, well, more than $3 billion, but let's just talk about Prop 1E and 84, $3 billion in the recent years since 2006. Well, any of these new water supply projects that are proposed as biological opinions or BDCP or in the Delta Plan, if they undermine those investments that have made to increase or reduce the risk of levee failure, that's a lost investment, if you will, on our flood side. So that's why that coordination is just so critical.
Well, Ms. Chair, I want to just say thank you for sharing these ideas. We've got the team right here around the table, and if you guys are nodding, thinking some of these things might be good, let's flesh this out and see if there's a better way that we can do this coordination. I also want to thank Ms. Terry for your response to Ms. Hannick's presentation as well when you were speaking earlier. But you raised an important point about enforcement, and for the Flood Protection Board, which has some enforcement duties, can you talk a bit about some of those challenges and how that is a threat, and those violations could be a threat to us, or perhaps an opportunity to strengthen our flood protection?
Certainly, and yes, you've correctly identified that. That is one of the major threats that we have to the levee, the 100-year-old system that has been, over the years, somewhat neglected, that has lots of old things on and around it. And of the agencies here, we are the one charged with taking care of that on the project levees. So we're talking about the 1,600 miles of levees, and there are most of the levees in the Delta that you're talking about, 2/3 of those, I think, are not project levees. So those, we don't have direct jurisdiction over those. But of the ones that we do, we've put a program together in conjunction with the help that we received from the legislature in 2013. And just last year, we passed regulations to complement that we're really ramping up our enforcement program. We're working with local partners in DWR to identify properties and to match funds with others who can help get some of these things out. But it is very challenging. You have folks who have, over the years, grown accustomed to having levees in their backyards, and there are beautiful rose gardens, and there are playhouses and sometimes structures in and on the levee, and convincing someone that that doesn't necessarily belong to them can be difficult, and it is challenging. One of the other big challenges we face, which is something we've recently identified, we've been working with the Division of Engineering within the department to identify our property rights even. Many of our property rights are from deeds that are very old, that are literally rolled up in bundles that you pick them up and they start to crumble. They're very old and they have never been digitized. They've never been modernized and they've never been surveyed. And so it's a barrier to enforcement if we don't know what our property rights are. So that is an effort that the state has been working on recently very aggressively.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Gallagher. And I want to thank the entire panel. The work that you do is incredibly important. We have heard about how we're not investing exactly what we need to protect Californians, but the work that you do saves lives, saves property, and so thank you for that and your time this morning. You can all step down at this point. So now we are entering into public comment. And so members of the public, if you'd like, you can please stand up. The sergeant will direct you to the microphone for you to use. And if I have a sense of how many people want to speak, I can get a sense of if I can give you 15 minutes apiece or something. I'm kidding about 15 minutes. Or something a little bit more manageable so everyone gets a chance to talk and then move about their day. But just be respectful of the fact that there are other people that want to speak behind you. Thank you, sir.
I can do that. My name is Ronald Stork. I'm on the conservation staff of Friends of the River, and I just wanted to introduce myself to you and the committee, and tell you about very briefly about how the environmental groups have been working on these floodwater management issues and floodplain restoration issues. We have since about 2011, we have a weekly phone call where a number of environmental groups, hunting groups, land managers, floodplain restoration practitioners. I think the list is about 40 of us, but there's probably about 10 of us that are regular attendees in these phone calls for the last 4 years. And it shows the level of commitment that these groups have had to track and follow and attempt to influence the nature of the flood control system and the way it's managed. And that's, of course, an ongoing thing. It probably will never end. These issues are always going to be in front of California. I think it's fair to say that it's our hope that the footprint of the floodwater management system in the state can, well, it's also the streams and rivers of the state. And so there's a significant intersection between nature and our flood control system, and we're seeking to maximize the multiple beneficial uses of that system. And that's an ongoing challenge, and we'll probably be talking to you and others about that as the years go on. But I just thought it was important to introduce the study group. It includes the Nature Conservancy and Audubon and California Wildlife Federation and Trout Unlimited, and the list goes on. But it's an important undertaking. And just one last final thing, I would suggest to note that the relationships between the various folks that play in this world are one of the more functional sets of relationships that we see in the state. Avenues of communication are generally open, and conflicts, though they are ongoing, can often be worked out to some degree, and sometimes completely, just because we have a relatively good working relationships with one another.
Thank you, Mr. Stark.
Good morning. My name is Chris Uncle. I am with the American Rivers, which is one of the groups that are part of the study group that Ron just referred to. I'd like to make some specific recommendations based on a lot of the work that we have done with the flood program and in relationship to our discussions that we've had over the last number of years. The first is to we've talked about lists of flood projects that are obviously going to be coming up and then very soon if we're going to spend $1.1 billion over this next year. We should be investing in multi-benefit flood management projects that provide flood risk reduction while also creating benefits for recreation, water supply, and fish and wildlife. Second, we should design multi-benefit flood management projects to promote recovery of endangered fish, particularly salmon, which are intricately tied to the efficacy of the flood system. We recognize that there have been conflicts and there's a permit requirement that tends to complicate the projects, straight flood management projects as well as habitat projects, and until we recover endangered salmon, we're going to be continuing to face inefficiencies. Third, we should avoid levee improvement investments that promote urban development on currently undeveloped floodplains. Levee investments that increase floodplain development actually increase the risk of placing more people in harm's way. Fourth, focus on a significant fraction of the remaining Proposition 1E money on system-wide improvements rather than local projects. That would provide the greatest bang for our buck, and obviously we need to get the most flood work out of the dollars we're going to spend. Expansion, number 5, expansion of the Yolo bypass is the single most important opportunity we have, where we can actually have an extremely measurable impact on flood risk reduction, flood stage on the Sacramento urban area, and at the same time provide some of those benefits that I just mentioned for fish that may be the key to recovery. And then finally, there are new flood bypass opportunities in the San Joaquin, lower San Joaquin River, particularly around Paradise Cut, that we've been working with a number of agencies on, a number of other organizations, and we feel that, that this provides a great opportunity to do all the things that I just mentioned. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Uncle.
Good morning. My name is Terry Grant. I'm a principal engineer with the Los Angeles County Flood Control District, which is a part of the LA County Department of Public Works. Thank you for this opportunity to share issues about our flood control system. We've been in existence since 1915, and flood risk reduction and stormwater conservation are very important to us. We now serve over 10 million people. And our system is comprised of 14 dams, about 500 miles of open channels, which includes a number of levees. We have almost 3,000 miles of underground storm drains, 22 miles of seawater barriers that protect the groundwater from seawater intrusion, and we have 26 spreading grounds that allow us to annually conserve 250,000 acre-feet of water. 5 of our major issues that we're facing today are very similar to those that were discussed today. Of course, the drought, and what we're trying to do there is maximize the capture of stormwater to help with our water supply. Stormwater quality is a major issue that requires substantial funding for meaningful planning and construction of effective projects. And we're also dealing with the increased identification of flood hazard areas by FEMA. Mainly because of Katrina, they've become more proactive about identifying areas that require the residents that have federally backed loans to obtain costly flood insurance. So funding is needed to address those flood areas to reduce the flood hazard, and so the residents wouldn't have to pay the flood insurance. Since we've been around for almost 100 years, we're dealing with the aging infrastructure that requires substantial funding to maintain it and rehabilitate it to prevent failures. as has been discussed today. And we're also facing increased desire for restoration and naturalization of our facilities. And we are open to that and providing multiple benefits with our facilities like recreation along the right-of-way, but we also still have to maintain our current level of flood protection. A major challenge to addressing all these issues, of course, is funding. That's not news to you. But another issue that we deal with a lot is regulatory redundancy. When we have multiple agencies protecting the same natural resources, and we're juggling their agency requirements and negotiating permits has been kind of daunting for us, especially on some of our major maintenance projects. We have, however, found the water bonds over the past years to be very beneficial, particularly Proposition 1E and the IRWIMP program, Integrated Regional Water Management Planning Program. So we would recommend that future state investments increase the focus on Southern California area. As Ms. Hannick mentioned, we contain 1/4 of the state's population and a significant part of the economy. Funding should support stormwater capture to not only address flooding issues, but also the drought and reduce our dependence on other areas for our water supply. And it also helps with improving water quality. We would like also have flood risk management projects be supported, or the construction and planning those projects be supported to address the flood hazard zones, and also funding to help with the aging infrastructure. Because while building new projects to address existing flooding is important, it's equally important that we make sure that the existing system remains intact. And lastly, we recommend further support of the IRWIMP program. We, as Ms. Hannick also stated, and several other people, we support integrated flood planning where we can address multiple community benefits in our projects. We've been able to do that over the past 14 years. We've taken that approach and we found it to be successful and best use of public funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grant. And before you leave, we can be sure to exchange some information, particularly with Ms. Leahy, so we can follow up with some of the points that you made, and be glad to do that. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Sir, you're up.
Hello, my name is Jeff Volberg. I'm with the California Waterfowl Association, and I'm also a part of the Monday morning study group that Mr. Stork and Mr. Uncle spoke of, and we very strongly support that effort. California Waterfowl Association is in kind of a unique position. The state of California, prior to development and settlement by Americans, was the Central Valley was a great large swamp. It was flooded every year naturally, and of course reclamation over the century and a half since 1849 has diminished that down by about 90%, 90 to 95%. There's very little of the residual wetlands that are left over from that natural time, and obviously we wouldn't want to go back to having a massive 4 million acre flooded area in the valley. What we are doing in order to protect the migratory birds who come down every year from Canada and Alaska and the Midwest is to manage the remaining wetlands in a way that they provide the maximum habitat value for those birds when they come down, because they're going to come down regardless. There's a lot fewer of them now because there's a lot less habitat, but we're trying to take the habitat that remains and provide the greatest amount of benefit. A lot of that habitat that remains is in floodplain areas, and we, of course, have an interest in that continuing to be flooded. On the other hand, of course, for that to be flooded in a catastrophic manner is not to our benefit or to the birds' benefit either, and so we're very involved in the engineering involved in managing the floodwaters, as well as continuing to promote the retention of a certain amount of residual wetlands in the state. We are discovering as we do this management that there are a lot of co-benefits to the type of work we do with managed wetlands and the flood management, flood protection needs of the state. And we're also discovering and beginning to develop information on the benefits that our managed wetlands, which are managed basically for waterfowl, but also provide benefits to endangered species such as the giant garter snake and also to shorebirds, white-faced ibis, and a number of other birds. And also, we're discovering that there are benefits possibly to salmon. And so we feel that managed wetlands are an important part of the overall flood management program and structure in the state, and we strongly support the concept of multiple benefits being designed into and developed into projects for flood protection and flood management. So thank you very much and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Loberg. Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, I'd like to thank all of the members who attended today and all the members of the public and, of course, the panelists for presenting today. I think we all have a better idea about the importance of our flood control system and the challenges that lie ahead. The legislature is paying attention, and it's my goal that this committee remain an engaged party in ensuring state investments are strategic, accountable, and transparent to the public. Again, thank you so much. This concludes the hearing. I should give an opportunity to close. Did you guys?